Why does growth sometimes require losing the very life you've once worked so hard to build? I think it's one of the most heartbreaking moments to wake up and realize one day that you have outgrown your life and people in it, and that some parts of it will only continue working if you remain a smaller version of yourself. Because from that moment on, there is no path without grief. In fact, you are choosing between two kinds of grief: the grief of losing relationships, identities, and communities that belong to the person you were and the life you had, and the grief of wasting your potential and never becoming the person that you know you could have become. Because the life we've built can only keep existing if we stop growing into the next version we're capable of becoming. And if you're someone who is committed to continuous growth in your life, that won't be a choice you only make once. And no one prepares you for this kind of decision or the price tag it comes with. So, how do we end up building lives that eventually become too small for us? I don't think any of us consciously choose that path. We were simply trying to build a life where we could belong, which required adaptation. No one sits you down when you're young and explains which parts of you seem to make people come closer and which ones may cause people pull away. We learn that through small moments, when your question that you asked made someone feel uncomfortable, or when you became emotional at the wrong time, or perhaps you cared deeply about something that others seemed to completely dismiss. Or maybe you were told directly that you're too sensitive, too serious, too much, or perhaps nothing was said at all. Because sometimes even a facial expression, a silence, or a sudden withdrawal is enough to teach you the same lesson. And something in you made a quiet note. You learned very early that connection was something that you couldn't survive without. So you started adapting around whatever you thought might threaten it. And it worked. You probably realized that being fully expressed and remaining connected wasn't always compatible. And if you're someone who is highly sensitive, empathic, intuitive, or simply someone who just notices subtle changes in other people very quickly, you can become incredibly good at this. That's how you start reading the room before anything has ever happened. You almost instinctively know what people are comfortable or uncomfortable with, what they expect from you, and what version of you would fit more naturally there. One day, however, it may become a real tragedy when adaptation outlives the environment that created it. And the strategy that once served as protection eventually becomes the very thing that now stands between us and who we are capable of becoming next. The strange thing is that adaptation rarely feels like pretending. It happens so gradually that it simply feels like who you are. See if this feels familiar. Someone asks you what you truly think. And before you've even realized, you've given the answer that's the easiest to receive, not the one that first came to your mind. Or maybe you talk about something that genuinely matters to you, and in the middle, you catch yourself pulling back. No one said anything, no one stopped you. You just catch yourself doing that before you even finished your thought, because you've already learned how to anticipate that moment before it even happens. You stopped waiting for people to reject you. You adjust before people even have the chance. And after doing it for so long, the strategy that once helped you survive can become your identity. And when that happens, you can live that way for many years without even questioning it. I know I did. Until something in me no longer fit the life I was living. I started losing interest in all those things that had once filled most of my days. Work events, certain people, nights out, the goals I used to have, always being somewhere and always doing something. And I couldn't quite understand what was going on and why. I just knew that I couldn't keep living the way I had been. It was as if my life was growing in the direction that I haven't quite caught up with yet. As if I approached this new chapter, I could feel it, but the rest of the map has not loaded yet. And every single time I tried to lean in more in that direction by spending more time alone, reflecting on what I truly wanted, trying to stay away from certain people, changing my habits, and just trying to slow down my life a little bit, something always seemed to inevitably pull me back. I remember one evening when it was one of my friend's last few days in Chicago before her moving out of state. There was a farewell dinner planned for her, and I knew it in my bones that I didn't want another late night out. I didn't want to keep drinking, and I didn't want to wake up for work not feeling well. But it was important for her, so I went, planning to leave early if I started feeling tired or overstimulated. And after dinner, as we were paying, everyone decided to go to another place to continue the night, and I said I was going home. What I didn't see coming was the loud drama that followed. And ironically, it wasn't even my friend who got upset. I was accused of being selfish, letting my friend down, and ruining the night for everyone. I paid, got up, and left. At that time, I thought that the conflict was about that evening. But now I can see how every system tries to preserve itself. Friendships do it, families do it, and so do the identities we've built around ourselves. And when one part of the system starts changing, everything instinctively tries to restore the old balance that existed before by trying to keep you exactly where you are. Looking back, I started recognizing the same pattern in situations that once seemed to be completely unrelated. When I first moved to the US, I worked in restaurants to make my ends meet. And I remember one day at work, I shared what I hoped to build one day and what kind of life I wanted to create. And a coworker overheard it, looked at me and said, "Who do you think you are? Know your place." And years later, when I was talking about the kind of impact I hope to make, a friend of mine, not anymore, laughed and said, "What impact? Come down back to earth." And even other immigrants told me to stop dreaming, to be realistic, and accept the fact that no one has been waiting for me here. Different people in different stages of my life, but the same underlying message that seemed very familiar, which is stay exactly where you are and do not become too different from people around you if you want to survive here. Many of those same people are still there today, and most of them at that time thought that it was just temporary. And there is nothing wrong with staying in one place if you truly love it and you feel like it's yours. What frightened me personally was not staying. It was abandoning my vision for my life and waking up 10 years later inside the same fear that had kept me from even trying. I've noticed that people often talk about growth as if it's simply a matter of courage, but I've never been completely convinced that it's true. Because courage doesn't make grief disappear. If anything, it changes what kind of grief we're willing to carry. And whatever we choose, something important will inevitably be left behind, whether it's friendships, relationships, workplaces, communities, or the identities that we've spent years building. Or maybe it's the life we know we're capable of living and the person we know we can become. And neither feels like the obvious choice while you're living in it. And on the surface, it may look like you stop saying yes to certain things and you start wanting different things. But inside, it feels as though your entire life is being reorganized. And the old version no longer fits while the new one still feels unfamiliar. And I wonder if that is why growth can feel so disorienting and isolating at times. Because all our connections with others were built around a version of us that no longer exists. It's gone forever. But some relationships can actually grow with us. And when that happens, I think it's one of the greatest and most generous gifts we can experience. Some people are fortunate enough to be able to grow alongside those we love and admire, while others spend years wondering if they will ever experience that. Because how can that even be possible when you're being continuously forced to become someone new, to shed old identities and go through a series of transformations, making you feel as though you've already lived several lives within just a single lifetime? Sorry. When life keeps asking you to leave, while every part of you is still praying to stay. There is a particular kind of heartbreak in loving someone or something deeply and knowing that you are still being asked to let it go. I have fought these moments before. I kept arguing with life, refusing to move. Even Yoda from Star Wars says, train yourself to let go of everything you are afraid to lose. And I wish I could tell you I listened right away. I didn't. And every time I resisted, life seemed to start collapsing and closing in around me until there was nothing else left to do than to take that next step that I've been avoiding. And at that time, it felt so cruel. But now I can also see why I resisted so much. And maybe you can recognize yourself in that as well. Staying or avoiding change actually protects us. It lets us postpone the decisions we already know we need to make. And as long as we stay in this old version of our lives that we have outgrown, we don't have to fully step into the new one. And we surely do not have to become responsible for this new version of ourselves that this new life may be requiring of us. And it can be very hard to admit because it's much easier to believe that circumstances and other people are holding us back and keeping us small. And it's much harder to see all the ways we sometimes participate in it ourselves. The truth is, staying where we are is often less frightening than fully stepping into a life that we've never lived before. Future may be asking us something that we don't yet know how to be. So often it's not just saying goodbye to other people, it's saying goodbye to the version of ourselves that we've learned to live as for decades. And perhaps that's why growth often feels like loss before it ever feels like freedom. So maybe the deeper question isn't whether we know who we're becoming. Maybe it's whether we're willing to build a life that actually has a room for that person. Looking back, I can honestly say that almost every life I'm now grateful for started with a decision that made very little sense to the life I already had. In fact, I did not even want to make any decision at that time. And the details can look very different for all of us, but the pattern itself is surprisingly similar. I couldn't keep living in Europe and build a life in the United States, just like I couldn't keep working in restaurants and build a career in tech. I couldn't keep living in Chicago and Hawaii at the same time. I needed to make a choice. And I certainly couldn't remain in systems that I now speak about and still be able to see them clearly in order to be able to tell the truth about them. None of those decisions felt like growth while I was making them. If I'm being completely honest, most of them felt like loss and grief. And some felt like I was making the biggest mistake of my life. At that time, all I could really see was what I was leaving behind. And it took me years before I could realize that every decision was quietly making the room for the life I couldn't have imagined while I was still standing in the old one. For a long time, I misunderstood how change really works. I thought that the new life will simply be added to the life I already had. And instead, I found out that one life usually occupies the space that the next one needs. And unless we're willing to let go of one, the other one never fully gets the chance to exist. And when life is asking us to let go of something that no longer fits, it might actually be already making the room for the life that has nowhere else to grow. Whenever we begin leaving the old behind, everything starts changing. Our surroundings, our relationships, and we're becoming slowly oriented toward a different kind of life than the one some of those original relationships were built around. The truth is, not every connection serves the same purpose. Some are built around helping people survive very difficult periods of life that otherwise may seem too overwhelming. So people gather together, they talk about what happened that week, they complain about work, maybe even other people, distract themselves for a while, and help each other survive something that would be too heavy to face alone. And sometimes that's exactly what is needed because life can be very hard. But there also comes a time when life is no longer asking us to survive. Now it begins asking us to participate more consciously into what comes next. Now it may be calling for us to generate more courage and truth and vulnerability for something completely new to emerge. You see, there are connections that do not merely help us survive or escape the weight of this life. On the contrary, they strengthen our ability to meet it. They sharpen our thinking, call out our avoidance, and challenge all those places where we've started settling. In the moments when we're about to abandon what truly matters, they remind us what we once said we wanted. They hold us accountable, not to criticize us or feed their own ego, but because they truly want to see us thrive and be the best version of ourselves. Rather than simply making this life easier to carry through distraction or escape, they send us back to our lives more awake and with more strength than we've had before. And I don't think what happens between people like that is simply friendship or attraction. It feels more like a shared commitment to growth, becoming more responsible and more honest for the only life that we've been given. Becoming more willing to bring something into this world that wasn't here before. And that can take any form, honestly, whether it's a piece of art, business, a community, a family, a deeper understanding of God, or a simple living in a way that leaves this world a little bit more whole than when we found it. Maybe that's why these relationships feel so different, because they leave both people feeling more expanded, more alive, and capable of contributing something that neither of them could have brought into this world alone. Growth may eventually require living certain forms of belonging, yes, but the purpose is never isolation. It's to become capable of deeper and more intentional forms of relationships and contribution. If you've been feeling guilty because of how much you've changed, wondering if you've become too different or whether something is wrong because parts of your old life no longer fit, I hope you remember this. You're allowed to outgrow a life that once saved you and still be grateful for the person you had become. You're allowed to grieve those who cannot come with you without confusing that grief for a sign that you've chosen the wrong path. Growing in different directions doesn't make anyone the bad person. Sometimes it simply means that your life may be asking of you different things. It is what it is. It does not mean that anyone would be left behind. People can surprise us. Sometimes friendship or love can grow where and when we least expect it. I don't think that the goal was ever to find places or connections that allow us to stay exactly as we are. I think it was about being fortunate enough and ready to come across those who care more about who we are becoming than those who we've always been. The people who truly want to see us thrive and grow instead of feeling threatened by it.